He was just a boy, fragile, nameless, and ordinary, until the Roman emperor set his gaze upon him. What followed was not a love story, but a nightmare masquerading as devotion. Sporus would become Nero's obsession, his creation, and his victim. Mutilated, renamed, and paraded as a wife, Sporus lived a tragedy so perverse it sounds more like myth than fact. But it's not myth. It happened. And the deeper you go into this story, the more you realize. Nero's cruelty wasn't random. It was calculated, theatrical, and terrifying. Stay with me, because today we're counting down the top 10 most disturbing things Nero did to Sporus. And I promise you, by the end, you'll never look at ancient Rome the same way again. Before we descend into this disturbing tale, don't forget to like and subscribe. If dark history, forgotten tragedies, and twisted truths are your thing, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Starting at number 10, Nero renamed him after his dead wife. Before the violence began, Nero stripped Sporus of something quietly devastating, his name. We don't know what Sporus was called before, because Nero made sure history would only remember him as a replacement. He renamed the boy Sporus, which chillingly was a term used for seed or spore. Some historians even believe it was a cruel joke, a reference to the boy's inability to produce children after what Nero would do next. But worse, Sporus was renamed after Nero's beloved wife, Poppaea Sabina, who had died, some say at Nero's own hands. This wasn't just a pet name or a private joke. It was a declaration. Nero didn't see Sporus as a person. He saw him as a vessel, a way to resurrect a fantasy. In ancient Rome, your name was your identity, your heritage, your future. By erasing it, Nero made sure Sporus belonged to him in every possible way. Number 9. He had him castrated. As a child before Sporus could even understand what was happening to him, his fate was already sealed. Nero ordered his castration, not for punishment, not for medicine, but for desire. It was a premeditated, state-sanctioned act of mutilation designed to make Sporus fit Nero's twisted vision of a perfect woman. And remember, this wasn't a medical procedure in a sterile room. It was ancient surgery. No anesthetic, no antibiotics, just pain. In the Roman Empire, castration was sometimes done by crushing, sometimes by cutting, sometimes by burning. Any one of those methods could cause deadly infection or shock. Sporus survived, but he didn't walk away unchanged. He walked away permanently altered, physically and psychologically. The act was irreversible. In Nero's eyes, this was just step 2 in his transformation of Sporus. But to Sporus, it was the death of any life he could have had. From that moment on, his body didn't belong to him. It belonged to the emperor. Nero had created his puppet, but he wasn't done yet. Number 8, he forced Sporus to live as his wife. After the brutal castration, Nero didn't just stop there. He forced Sporus into a grotesque performance of womanhood. Dressed in fine silks and veils, adorned with jewelry and makeup, Sporus was paraded through the palace and the streets of Rome, not as a boy, not even as a slave, but as the emperor's wife. This wasn't love, it was theater, a sick imperial illusion. Nero hosted a public wedding where he played the groom and Sporus, now emasculated and dressed like a Roman bride, played the bride. The Roman elite were made to watch and cheer, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Nero's power made it law. To object would be treason. And Sporus? He had no choice, no voice, no say in any of it. He wasn't allowed to grieve his stolen identity or to speak as the person he truly was. Instead, he was forced to perform. Every hour, every day, his very existence twisted to fit Nero's delusion. This was psychological torture masked in royal robes. And the most chilling part? Nero didn't do this in secret. He did it in front of the entire empire. But what he did next blurred the line between control and cruelty. Number 7, Nero paraded Sporus as a symbol of his dead wife. Nero didn't just dress Sporus as a woman, he dressed him as Poppaea Sabina, his wife who had died under suspicious circumstances. Most ancient sources allege Nero kicked her to death while she was pregnant. Grief may have haunted Nero, but instead of mourning like a sane man, he tried to resurrect Poppaea by turning Sporus into her. Sporus wore Poppaea's gowns. He wore her makeup. He styled his hair like hers. Even the jewelry, reportedly once owned by the late Empress, was draped over him, piece by piece. It was as if Nero had created a ghost bride using a child as his canvas. He took Sporus everywhere: public games, state banquets, even diplomatic events. Imagine being paraded before foreign dignitaries, not as yourself, but as the reanimated fantasy of a man's grief and guilt. This wasn't about Sporus. It wasn't about Poppaea. It was about Nero's obsession with control over people, over perception, over life and death itself. And Sporus, still just a teenager, was locked in that performance, day after day, smile after smile, unable to escape the shadow of a dead woman he had never even met. But as twisted as this was, what came next pulled Sporus even deeper into the heart of an empire gone mad. Number 6. He took Sporus on a mock royal honeymoon across the empire. Most people imagine a honeymoon as a private escape, romantic, peaceful, intimate. Nero's version, a grotesque parade. After marrying Sporus in a public ceremony, complete with guests, dowries, and even a bridal veil, he didn't just go back to the palace. He took Sporus on what ancient historians describe as a mock honeymoon tour across multiple Roman provinces. Sporus, dressed as an empress, was forced to accompany Nero at festivals, games, and official ceremonies. Every stop was a spectacle, with Sporus displayed beside Nero like a prized possession. Locals were expected to cheer, flatter, and pretend this horror was love. Nero wasn't content with private fantasy. He wanted the entire empire to play along. Historians suggest he demanded that officials address Sporus with imperial honors, as if Poppaea herself had risen from the grave. It wasn't just humiliating, it was state-sponsored delusion. And Sporus had no say, no escape. Just eyes watching him in every city, every coliseum, every palace corridor. It wasn't a honeymoon, it was a victory lap of madness, with Sporus as the trophy, paraded through the empire like a breathing monument to Nero's broken reality. And tragically, this was still only the middle of the nightmare. Number 5. Nero made Sporus reenact his dead wife's funeral. Most people grieve with silence, remembrance, or prayer. Nero grieved by turning Sporus into a walking ghost. Poppaea Sabina, Nero's wife, died under suspicious circumstances, many believe at his own hands. But instead of mourning quietly, Nero began projecting his guilt, grief, and obsession onto Sporus. He didn't just dress Sporus like Poppaea, he forced him to reenact her funeral. Ancient accounts suggest that Nero staged elaborate ceremonies where Sporus was paraded through the imperial court as if Poppaea had risen from the dead. Sporus, still just a teenager, was made to lie in a golden coffin, attend solemn rites in full regalia, and appear at public banquets as if he were both bride and corpse. It was more than eerie, it was psychological torment. Every moment was scripted by Nero. Every gesture, every word Sporus was ordered to say was part of a twisted performance to soothe the emperor's fractured mind. And the worst part? Everyone had to participate in the illusion. Senators, guards, servants, the Roman elite, they all stood by and played along, clapping for a teenager forced to embody the shadow of a murdered queen. There's no clearer image of how Nero viewed Sporus, not as a human being, but as a living, breathing shrine to his lost obsession. And with each reenactment, Sporus lost another piece of himself. Number 4. He publicly married Sporus in a mock imperial wedding. Powerful men have done strange things to keep up appearances, but Nero turned the Roman Empire into a stage for delusion. What began as secret manipulation turned into full-blown performance art when Nero held an official imperial wedding ceremony to Sporus. Not in secret, not behind palace walls, publicly, in front of senators, nobles, and the Roman elite. Sporus, dressed in the finest silks, veiled like a bride, was given away in marriage to Nero in a lavish event designed to mimic the exact protocols of a royal wedding. Nero wore the robes of a groom, made formal vows, and declared Sporus his lawful wife. He even handed out dowries and hosted a grand banquet to celebrate the union. To the crowd, this wasn't a union of love. It was a display of power, carefully staged to force the empire into compliance with Nero's deranged fantasy. No one could object, and those who dared would vanish. This was not about companionship. It was a public declaration. I will marry who I want. I will rewrite tradition, and no one will stop me. Sporus wasn't just trapped in a costume. He was locked in a role, a puppet in a state-sponsored hallucination, made to smile while Rome watched. The marriage wasn't sacred. It was a farce built on trauma and performed for an audience afraid to look away. And that was just one of many horrors that Sporus was forced to survive. Number 3, Nero paraded Sporus across the empire as an empress. Most victims of abuse suffer in silence, but Sporus, his suffering was turned into a spectacle. After the public wedding, Nero didn't just tuck his bride away in a palace. He paraded Sporus across the empire, bringing him to official functions, public festivals, and imperial tours, always dressed in full empress attire, silks, jewels, makeup, even servants to attend to his needs. But it wasn't kindness, it was theater. Every appearance reinforced Nero's twisted narrative, that Sporus was the reincarnation of his dead wife Poppaea Sabina. Crowds watched, senators bowed, the Roman elite whispered behind closed doors, but no one dared defy the emperor. And so the performance continued, day after day, city after city. And Sporus? He had no way out. He couldn't protest. He couldn't escape. Every outing reminded him, and the world, that he was no longer himself. He was an object, a symbol, a hollowed-out replacement of a woman long gone. Even more disturbing, Sporus was expected to play along, smile, wave, obey. Because if he didn't, Nero's cruelty could always go further. By parading Sporus as a living ghost of his dead wife, Nero blurred the line between love and delusion, grief and control. Sporus wasn't living a life. He was being forced to perform someone else's death, and the empire watched in silence. Number 2, he forced Sporus to participate in public marital duties. Nero's cruelty didn't end at the altar, or even with the parades. What came next crossed every imaginable line of power, shame, and psychological torment. In full view of Rome's elite, Nero demanded that Sporus fulfill his role as a wife. And no, it wasn't just symbolic. Multiple ancient sources suggest that Nero staged deeply disturbing public displays, mock consummations, suggestive acts, and even obscene performances to prove to the court that his marriage was real. Sporus wasn't just emasculated, he was publicly violated, humiliated in front of men who were supposed to represent the height of Roman civilization. Imagine being a teenager, robbed of your name, your body, your identity, and then being ordered to pretend, night after night, that you were in love with the very man who mutilated and enslaved you. But this wasn't about love, it was about domination. It was Nero's final message to his enemies and his court. Look what I can do. I am beyond your morality. I am the law. And Sporus, he had to survive it, to live through it, to carry it in silence. These weren't private horrors. They were staged performances of power, where one boy's pain became another man's proof of control. By turning the most intimate act into a grotesque form of punishment, Nero didn't just destroy Sporus' future, he destroyed every boundary that makes us human. And at number 1, the ultimate betrayal. A death without dignity. After years of torment, humiliation, and forced performance, Sporus had survived the fall of Nero. But survival didn't mean freedom. Once Nero died by suicide, Sporus was passed from one powerful Roman to another, like an object with no say in his own fate. First to Nymphidius Sabinus, a man who also wanted to marry him. Then likely used again by Otho, the short-lived emperor who had ties to Nero's inner circle. Sporus became a living relic of Nero's madness, paraded and possessed by men who either wanted to exploit his connection to power or relive the sick fantasies that Nero made real. And finally, when Sporus was ordered to appear in a grotesque public performance mocking his own trauma, something in him shattered. He chose to die. Some sources say he took his own life rather than be paraded and humiliated again. This was the final betrayal. After everything he had endured, he still had no escape except death. No grave marked his suffering. No voice recorded his words. No justice ever came. All that remains are the whispers of historians and the echo of one unbearable truth. Sporus never got to be a boy, never got to be a man, never got to be free. And that is the most disturbing act of all. Not the cruelty of one emperor, but a world that watched and did nothing. If this story moved you, unsettled you, or opened your eyes to a part of history you never knew, hit that like button and subscribe. There are many more dark corners of the past we're about to uncover together. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Dark Lore.